So, making a compelling game. We all want to make compelling games, I've lost it already. Compelling games, they're fun, they're why we enjoy it, they're why we want to make games ourselves. So everybody wants to know how to make a compelling game. But there's a lot of different ways that people say that you can go about doing them, and not very many of them cover every single good game out there. For example, you could say a good game has a great story and good characters, but not all great games have that. For example, Minecraft has absolutely none of that and is the most popular game in all of human history. So clearly it's not just that. Well, if we're going off of Minecraft, then maybe it's customization, I can't speak, and letting your creativity wander. But some good games are also kind of, limited in scope, and you only have a certain selected number of options, most fighting games. I put this in for Aldros, I'm not sure if he's here. But yeah, so for most fighting games, you have only a set number of characters, and you don't really get much for customization or anything outside of that. So maybe it's something like Challenge, perhaps, but then there's also a ton of other games that are just there for simple, mindless fun, like Warframe, for instance. So if it's not that, then maybe engaging movement systems, maybe it just feels good. But then on the other hand, we have whole genres point and click and walking simulators that get by with almost no movement and are still really good. I know this is a really crappy picture, but this is from that new horror game that came out recently at Dead of Night, which is a really good game and you should play it. So if it's not that, then maybe it's impressive visuals and all of that, because as you can see, all the games here have a very unique style. But then there are some games, especially in the indie genre, that have very minimalistic visuals. Like this one game takes it to the logical extreme. Thomas Was Alone, and you literally play as a colorful rectangle. So there's a whole lot of things that you immediately spring to mind that might... What the hell? Sorry, my slides just went away. There we go. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you could immediately come to mind that might make a good game, but there's always exceptions. And if you want a good definition, then I'd argue that it should encompass all games that are considered good. So one thing that my personal philosophy about this is that something that makes a really good, really compelling game is a game's tone. So according to Merriam-Webster, tone is, quote, a general character, quality, or trend of a thing. And I just realized I didn't cut out the healthy elasticity. God, this whole slide deck is an absolute mess. So basically, if you extend that to game design, tone could be sort of considered as a cohesive feeling that's evoked by sort of a sum of the game's parts. So all of the things that we mentioned on the previous slide, like art style, movement, feel, challenge, all those things help contribute to a game's overall tone. And if a game has a very cohesive and engaging tone, then I'd argue that's what makes it a compelling game. So just to sort of prove that and give some good examples, we'll start with the positive ones first. So the first one is Portal. So I have that sort of all the games sort of split up in this way where I sort of analyze them by their gameplay, their story, and their overall mood or tone. It says mood in some places and tone in others because I made this. I don't know. I probably just missed that one. But yeah, so Portal, its gameplay is extremely mobile. It's high octane, very interactive, on the fly puzzle solving. And the story similarly, chat. Yeah, nice, Leslie. Oh my gosh, my screen is too small. So yeah, so that's the gameplay, and the story is all about essentially escaping and outwitting Gladys here, who's basically this sharp-tongued, emotionally abusive rogue AI. And so the entire tone of Portal, from the gameplay to the story and the dialogue, is very clever and fast-paced, because you're dealing with both a battle of wits and a battle of puzzle solving and creativity. And then to go in a completely opposite direction, we have Dark Souls, which I'm sure you all know about. It's pretty well known. It has a very brutal combat structure and very much forces you to learn and grow stronger by failing repeatedly, and that's just kind of the way that the game is. It's sort of its whole appeal. And its story very much follows the same sort of beats. You're sort of trying to get stronger and learn more so that you can try to save your sick and dying world. So it's very harsh and fatalistic, but at the same time, that's kind of its appeal. And last but not least, we have Minecraft again, because I just think that it's an amazing example of this. You're basically just kind of left to your own devices, and it's just like, here is this world for you to explore, where there's some challenges for you to overcome, and it's very much make your own story. So there is no canon story of Minecraft. There are, like, you know, obviously there are all those theories about, like, oh, Minecraft is like the result of global warming and all that, but that's not essential to, you don't need to experience that story to enjoy Minecraft. It's very much make your own thing, very creative, and you have literally endless possibilities. It has that sort of tone, but you can honestly make any sort of tone you want in Minecraft. I'm sure you guys, when Minecraft was blowing up, like last year or the year before that, there were like all of these maps where people were making their own games inside of Minecraft with their own separate tones. So it's very much a make your own sort of thing. So with that, we've had some good examples, and now let's look at what happens when you have less than ideal levels of tone. Because honestly, it's just as good to learn from bad examples than it is to learn from good. So from what I've seen, tone tends to fall apart in, like, really fall apart, if it's not just a bad game to begin with, in two very different sorts of ways. There's the issue of scope, like scope creep. I'm sure you've heard that word before. And if not, it's basically when, like, a game's ideas outgrows what you're actually able to put out. It's not just related to games, but most, like, production or creative endeavors. Scope creep is a really big issue. And that can happen for a variety of different reasons. Either, like, you have, like, conflicting creative directions when you're designing it. You have to go through, like, multiple team overhauls for whatever reason. And this especially tends to impact games that, like, keep getting expanded and updated, or very long, very high budget projects. Those tend to be the ones that get impacted the most by scope creep. And then there is also an issue with tone that is specific to sequels. I'm sure you guys have all experienced this with one game or another, where it came out with a sequel and it didn't quite manage to capture the magic of the original quite as you would have liked. And that usually tends to be, like, an issue of conflicting tones with the sequel and the original. And that usually tends to result from one of two things. There can be others, but these are the two that I thought of at the top of my head. Either you carried over mechanics from the first game that doesn't really apply to the current game, or you have conflicting tones across titles, which, yes. Oh, come on, Zoom. There we go. Ah, yes, Mass Effect. I didn't actually put that in here because I'm not 100% familiar with the Mass Effect series, but I have heard things about that game. So, yeah, first we'll be looking at scope creep and we will be looking at Warframe. Again, I know I talk about Warframe a lot, but it's because I know it very well. I've been playing it consistently for upwards of 3 years and I have like over 1,000 hours logged into that game. So I know it pretty well. So basically, to just go over the basics if you don't know what Warframe is about, it's a horde shooter with like fast-paced, very intuitive movement and equally fast-paced gunplay, so it's very much about like excitement. It's a power fantasy game, let's be honest here. And basically, most of the story beats, the cohesive quest ones at least, they mostly center around like this idea of assisting oppressed people and like rebelling against corruption and sort of like, stick it to the man and sort of dealing with all of the like the whole mess of the universe that this corrupted ancient system has left the current state of the world in. So its tone in general is very epic and hopeful. You're going around helping people, making the world better for them, and you get to feel like a badass while you're doing it. And that's why a lot of people like it, You like to feel like you get to help people and feel cool at the same time. But recently, it's been getting into some hot water with some recent developments. Specifically, I brought up three. So those of you who are familiar with Warframe, you will undoubtedly have heard about the whole thing that happened with Railjack. It was a huge, like, brand new game mode that they added that was extremely slow, extremely clunky, extremely buggy, but that's not really the point here. So as you can imagine, it doesn't really fit in very well with Warframe's, like the rest of Warframe's gameplay, where you're like jumping around, gliding across huge chasms, like just annihilating everything. And then this new game mode has you piloting a huge, really floaty feeling ship. And you get to you turn at like a snail's pace. And it just doesn't really fit very well with the movement scheme that players are used to. And then this also continued story-wise, where the newest quest line that it's not really a quest line, it's just like a one-off thing in their new open world. But they added these NPCs that you are supposed to help in order to get things from that new open world, who belong to the exact same corrupted government system that threw the whole system to hell, that you are trying to pull back from the brink of destruction because of these people. So now this new quest is asking you to help these people, which is just kind of conflicting narrative-wise. And then also there is this sort of looming event threat on the horizon that they keep announcing and then keep pushing back and all that stuff. That's basically an oppressed race by the corrupted system that you are fighting against, that have been sort of portrayed as irredeemable monsters that will destroy the entire world if they aren't stopped, which is also kind of clashing with their, the whole assist the oppressed, fight the man sort of thing. In recent developments, you have been assisting the man and fighting the oppressed, and it's all very conflicting. And I feel like a lot of these issues have come because Warframe is a very, very old game. It has been consistently in development since 2013, and they've just been building and building and building on it. And eventually you're just destined to fall into scope creep if your game is that massive, which is something that they've been running into. So to jump from that to the points I made about sequels, we're first going to be talking about mechanics, specifically through BioShock and BioShock Infinite. So as I said before, lots of sequels will carry over mechanics from their precursor games, for like just practical reasons. It saves on development time, so you don't have to just scrap everything and redo it all from scratch. But this can result in conflicting mechanics. So in Bioshock, the original Bioshock is set in Rapture, if you guys know it. It's sort of like this crumbling, fallen dystopia that used to be like billed as a paradise. It's very much an everyman survival of the fittest sort of thing. Everyone that you encounter here is either insane or addicted to drugs that turns them into monsters. It's just an absolute wreck of a city. And so you as the character have to scavenge and fight for your life to survive. And it's a very good game. It really nails that tone. But then in Bioshock Infinite, the setting changes to this glorious high society England utopia floating in the clouds. And yet it maintains a lot of those scavenging, combative, survivalist mindset mechanics that made sense in Rapture, but no longer make sense in Columbia. For example, like, I think the guy that I watched who made a video about this, he said, like, you can still loot places, you can, like, dig stuff out of trash cans, you can, like, attack people on the streets with, like, not a whole lot of lasting negative consequences. So, like, a lot of stuff that made sense and you could have easily gotten away with in Rapture, but, like, don't make a whole lot of sense in Columbia. So that's sort of like a bit of a clashing tone between the setting and the mechanics. And then another thing that can come up is conflicting tones between the sequels narratively. So we're going to be talking about The Last of Us and what happened with The Last of Us Part 2, and my theory as to why people didn't like that game very much. Yes, I'm sorry, Jess, I don't mean to bring up old wounds, but we have to talk about it eventually. I did not know that was going to happen. So The Last of Us Part 1, as we all know, the story is basically just like a father-daughter relationship in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and they basically use Joel and Ellie's relationship to sort of explore these narrative threads of like overcoming trauma and how important it is to maintain human connections, even in the face of like horrifying circumstances like the actual end of the world. So it very much follows that more heartwarming, hopeful sort of post-apocalyptic story where it's like, yeah, the world has gone to shit, everything sucks, but we can get through it together, that sort of thing. And I like that kind of post-apocalyptic message. But then The Last of Us 2, Part 2, did a complete 180 from that message. And basically the story is you're following Ellie's self-destructive downward spiral as she's pursuing revenge and all of that fun stuff. So they basically took a beloved character and like kind of turned her into admittedly kind of an asshole, so that they could like sort of explore like, you know, the pain of loss and like the perpetuation of violence and retaliation, which is very much like, it's like the exact opposite kind of post-apocalyptic story that like you see all the time in like what's that zombie show that was like super popular? The Walking Dead. There we go. Yeah, so it's sort of like following The Walking Dead sort of thing, where it's like once society crumbles, man becomes a true monster and like all that fun stuff. It's very bleak, very tragic, and very much not what the first game was going for with its message and its story. So I have a feeling that's kind of where a lot of the whiplash came from, because it is very much narrative whiplash from like the complete like one side of the spectrum of post-apocalyptic stories to the complete other side of that spectrum with very little in between for like, there wasn't much of a transition between games to get from one side of that spectrum to the other. So that's my personal theory as to why there was a lot of whiplash. There was also just like a lot of other things going on with The Last of Us Part 2, but that's my main theory as to why it wasn't very well received. Yeah, I heard good game, bad sequel a lot when that shit show was going down. So basically, wrapping up with some final thoughts. From my perspective, at least, tone is very, very important to make your game feel cohesive and compelling. If you have a consistent tone, then you can throw basically any aspect of. Sorry, I'm choking on my own spit. Yeah, you can combine basically any aspects of game design, any like movement styles, art styles, combat, story, character, any of that stuff. So long as it all adds up into a nice cohesive tone, then anything goes, really. And then just some final tips. Beware of scope creep. It can absolutely derail like any project if you let it, so don't let it. And then if you are ever lucky enough to get to make a sequel to a game that you produce, and if you do, kudos to you. You deserve all of the praise. But yeah, if you do ever manage to get around to making a sequel, I'd recommend at least going back and replaying your original game. Try to get back into that early development headspace when you were first figuring out what it was you were trying to make, so that then you can reorient yourself with the tone that you were going for in the original, so that you don't end up with like the whole narrative whiplash thing, and so you can revise and review any mechanics that you might be thinking about bringing over to make sure that they make sense with the tone that you're going for in your sequel. And just to clarify, I'm not saying like it's a bad thing for you to like shift tones between like across games or between games or whatever, but try not to go from like The Last of Us did, from one side of the spectrum to the other with no in between, because then it's not going to make much sense, and it's not going to be very coherent. It's not going to be enjoyable for anybody. So yeah, that's all I've got. If you guys have any comments, thoughts, questions, anything.
I think we can end the recording.
Yes, I am still recording. I should stop that.